Welcome to the Center for Threat-Informed Defense's, also known as CTID's, four-part series on threat modeling, where we're diving into the threat modeling process by answering four key questions. I'm Tiffany Bergeron with the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. Joining us on this series is Adam Shostak, a leading expert on threat modeling, who has written many books and much training on this subject, and also is one of the creators of the four questions we've been discussing. This is part 3 in our series. It's a 4-part series on threat modeling with Adam. And part 3 is, what are we going to do about it? So please be sure to start at part 1 if you have not already. Part 1 talks about what are we working on. And part 2 is the second question in the threat modeling process. What could go wrong? Welcome, Adam.
Thank you.
So for today, we will be talking about question 3. What are we going to do about it? So in question 3, we look back at the threats that we identified in question 2, and we start identifying security measures or mitigations for those threats. And as we discussed in question 2, what could go wrong? There's this process of identifying threats that we go through, and then prioritization can happen perhaps in section 2, which has been the center's approach under our threat modeling with attack project. Or perhaps we wanted to look at that prioritization more now in section 3 and prioritize remediation and what are we going to do about it. So Adam, could you please share with us how we can go about answering the question, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. So this is fun because there are so many different things we can do. We can write our code in a memory safe language so that it's less likely to be exploitable. We can deploy tools to protect, detect, or respond to problems. So, for example, we might deploy identity and access management to help us manage spoofing problems in a consistent way. We might deploy a DLP sort of solution so that we can deal with an attacker who's already in the system and taking advantage of existing user accounts. And the way I think about this is architecture, things like where are the boundaries that we're going to put in the system, its implementation, and then its controls. Things that NIST CSF tends to focus on, right? So it's, if I can be acronym soup for just a moment, it's let's get the SSDF, the Secure Software Development Framework controls in place, and then let's put the CSF controls in place. The CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, there's the acronym expansion I'm looking for. And so we've got all sorts of, and we have features, right? I can write better logs. I can implement TLS. I can make sure that all of my access control decisions are being made in one place by writing some authorization module that everything calls. And so I've got all of these different choices about what are we going to do about it, depending first on where we are in the development project. So what are we working on? Rears its head again. Or where we are in a deployment project. You know, if the code is done, if the service is live and operational, then we're adding controls that layer on top. We are, in that popular phrase, bolting some security onto it. And so we've got all of these different choices that we get to make. And yeah, there's just so many ways that we get to make them.
Yes, that is very true. There isn't just one approach, and we talked about, threat modeling. It's not just one size fits all either. So it really needs to be customized to the environment, and customized to what your goal is, right? How are we going to go about this, this mitigation, this remediation area? What are we going to do about the threat? What is the threat? What are we going to do about it? Yeah. And if I could just mention, when we talk about security capabilities and looking at that, the center does have a website called Mappings Explorer, and this is a central repository where we provide various mapping resources. And these are different security capabilities mapped to techniques in MITRE ATT&CK. So for example, we have the NIST 853 framework mapped, and you can use Mapping Explorer to look at the various controls that are available in NIST and the specific attack techniques that they can help mitigate. We also have different products that are mapped as well. So, we mentioned Microsoft a few times. We do have an M365 area, and we also talked about how different things work in partnership together. So we have another framework mapped where we're looking at Intel systems and what security software layered on top of that, stacked on top of that, can help bring. And then using mapping such as this, or developing mappings of your own, looking at security capabilities and your threats, that can help you start understanding what's available to start either, as you mentioned, protect, detect, or respond to threats to your systems.
I love that. And one of the things I love about it is it illustrates the choices that we get in saying, what are we going to do about this?
Mm-hmm.
And, far too often I see people threat modeling at the end of a project because it's a requirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are we going to do about it shifts from prevention to detection.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the concrete's poured, all you're going to do is what you can do. And I think this really ties to the question of prioritization,
Mm-hmm.
because prioritization, in my mind, is not a security question. It's a resources and budgets question. It's what can we do with what's here? And sometimes it's really cheap to add impressively good layers of security. And my favorite example of this is AWS Lambdas or Azure Functions,
Mm-hmm.
which are these things, and I used the jargon before, I realized I should have explained it. They're side effect free programming environments. And what that means is the code runs and the system looks the same when the code stops running as it did before, unless you did explicit things. So you can open a database and write to it from a Lambda. But what you can't do is believe that the next time the Lambda runs, it's going to run on the same machine and that thing you scribbled into /temp is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means, because it's side effect free, we get all sorts of nice security properties of ephemerality, which break a lot of attacker techniques.
Mm-hmm.
We can decide exactly what it's going to do. And so anything outside of the normal stuff it's going to do, right? If it takes one HTTP call in and does one thing in a database, and then next week it's talking to Facebook, we know it shouldn't be talking to Facebook. We don't, and so we can say any change in behavior is a weirdness, and that makes intrusion detection so easy. Like it's literally almost free. But if instead we're deploying, say, virtual machines, those virtual machines have a lot more complexity. It can be harder to say what it is they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so this, for me, ties into this question of prioritization, which is it's important to understand what attackers are doing to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can close off a whole bunch of attacks by going to lambdas, you know, we've got a cost trade off. We should make that. We should be thoughtful about, can we do everything we want? Is it going, all the microservices questions? All of this prioritization work for me ties into what choices could we make that let us deal with this thing. And so I like pushing prioritization. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry. I like pushing prioritization into the question of what are we going to do about it because we prioritize between those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do like how you're bringing that the availability of resources into that, right? So it's not just what types of mitigations are available to you, but we're also talking about people and budget um, and time, right? So looking across all of those things, how can we prioritize mitigation efforts? Yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be considered.
And this, I sometimes think about threat modeling as this weird stepping out of the stuff that developers are doing, the stuff that systems operators are doing,
Hmm.
of we're building this thing. We go into this weird space of asking what can go wrong with structured ways, with I don't mean this in a critical way, I just mean in an acknowledging way with jargon,
Hmm.
right? We've got this persistence and delivery, and what the heck does all of that mean?
Hmm.
And then we come back into this space of what are we going to do about it? Aha, we're going to write features, we're going to deploy controls, we're going to integrate, we're going to make sure our logs go over there, whatever the things we're going to do
Hmm.
feel like the not necessarily the normal day to day of a software engineer or a systems engineer,
Hmm.
but they feel closer to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that we're also looking at, not just the resources, but there's that a layer of um, not just threat management, but also risk management in answering this question, and what are we going to do about it? So not only what are the resources available to mitigate the threat, and prioritizing on that one, but also looking at what are the risks. Um, so we've identified the threats. We've perhaps already identified various ways we could go about mitigating those threats. But when it comes to the actual risk of that threat in our environment for our system, is it a low threat, or is it something that we're really concerned about? Is it a high threat? Is it a high threat to high value data? And perhaps even if we have more limited resources, maybe we need to focus on those, right? So identifying those areas of risk is also important to this whole idea of scoring. So it's not just scoring the threats, it's not just scoring the defenses, it's also looking at and in a way scoring the risk. Um, and I think that's important to
Can I
understand.
ask you to expand on this a little bit? And maybe let's start at the beginning
Sure.
and say, how are you using the words threat and risk? And what's the relationship between those? Because I think this is a place that confuses a lot of people.
Sure. So in this particular case, when I'm talking about threats, I'm talking about the threats that we identified in question two, and the what could go wrong. So those, as a reminder, are evidence-based threats. So things that have actually happened to similar systems, or environments, or theoretical threats, things that could potentially be happening. Um, you know, um, Reports of proof of concept, things such as that could be happening to your system, or for vulnerabilities in system components, or system software. So that's what when I'm talking about threats.
Mhm.
That's more what I'm talking about. And when I'm talking about risks, I'm talking about risks for those particular threats, and in the sense of the scored threats. So in in the center's threat modeling process, we did a level of scoring and what could go wrong. So we looked at the theoretical threats, we looked at the evidence-based threats, and in our environment for our system, um, and those again were associated with MITRE ATT&CK techniques. We put a value on those.
And is the value a likelihood? Is it an impact? Is it a combination?
It actually is a combination. So when we're getting into the scoring, there are various things that we can look at. And, it definitely is things like, is this an active threat? Is this actively happening? Is this actively happening for your environment? So financial sector is one that we've used a few times. So is this something that banks are dealing with? Is ransomware something that you are concerned about for your environment? That would be something you might want to rate higher, if something's being used in a ransomware attack. And for a while in the medical field, they were being targeted. City governments were being targeted with ransomware attacks. So that might be something that for your environment you would like to place a higher score on. So these are really derived scores, not just based on attack TTPs, not just based on the actuality of them happening in the wild, but it's also what's important to you. What are you most
Mhm.
concerned about for your environment? And that may be more evidence-based scoring. So particular threat groups targeting an industry with a specific technique, or for example, something that's already happened to you, something that you've there's a newly reported CVE in your environment or a zero-day attack. Perhaps it's something that you're going to score higher, um, as a higher threat to your environment. So that's still looking at scoring um, in the threat-based area.
Okay. One of the things that I find really interesting about this is, frankly, I see a lot of people going wrong with scoring because their scores are not derived in a consistent way.
Mm, yeah.
And building off of, if it's observed, it gets this score, and if it's observed in your industry, it gets a higher score, turns it from this opportunity to have a debate into, here are the factors that matter. And if someone wants to adjust it because this happened in our environment, the adjustment becomes a very specific thing that we can replicate. And and a lot of times I see risk management being used as this, people claim they're managing risk, but what they're really managing is development budgets.
Mm,
And they declare that X is a low risk because it would be expensive to fix.
yeah.
And I think the thing that you have done here, which is really useful, both within the work that you are doing, but also much more broadly, and so I want to call this out for listeners very specifically, in in creating a replicable process with defined input lists, we can get away from a lot of the debate over risk scores, and that is both hard to do in a lot of parts of
Mhm.
cybersecurity and incredibly worthwhile when we discover ways to do it.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning that, because I think that is what's important here, as as a community, as a threat modeling community. we are trying to build out a documented process and provide these steps that are repeatable and reusable, and do help provide that framework. So it's um, it's more process based than opinion based.
And that's and you know, there's always room for opinions, there's always room for deviations. Knowing when we're deviating, and look, we both work with some super smart people, and you not only work with super smart people, you also work with people who have access to a wide variety of information.
Mhm.
And outside the government space where you've done a lot of work, that information is sometimes not available. And figuring out when we're going to bring it in, when we're not going to bring it in, is something we get as we move from this is my this is my opinion about how to do it
Mhm.
to here's a document that says how to do it,
Yeah.
and your document and my document are different. And I think it's great because it gives our audience a chance to say, okay, why this versus that, or even better, why this versus that in this project.
Yes, yes, and it's an excellent way to put it. What approach makes more sense? Um, what will benefit this particular? What are we working on? Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, Adam. This has been an excellent discussion. I think that covers question 3 of the threat modeling process. And to our viewers, be sure to check back for our next and final installment, where we will be discussing question 4, did we do a good job? And that's not a rating of me and Adam. That's a rating of the threat modeling process. And in closing, Adam, would you like to share a resource related to question 3? What are we going to do about it?
So rather than a resource, what I want to share right now is encouragement to go do some. Pick up pick up the thing that you are working on now and apply the 4 questions. Well, apply the first 3 questions. Ask, what am I working on? What can go wrong? What am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Use the documentation from the Center for Threat Informed Defense. Use some of the documentation that we've got available, or just ask the questions at a very high level. Because one of the things that we talked about in the threat modeling manifesto, maybe I'll share the manifesto as a resource. How's that?
Yeah.
One of the things that we put in there is a preference for doing threat modeling over talking about it.
Mm.
And we here are talking about it, and you listening should go do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Take what you're learning here, take the resources available and apply them in your environment. All right. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers.